Well, welcome everyone. This is our second to last session for Shape the Trainer in 2021. Really thrilled to have Michael Marr with us, who works with assessment in the Lory Student Center. And Michael is going to introduce us to the concept of socially just assessment and how we might be able to utilize them in our areas. So thank you, Michael, for joining us, for bringing us through, and I'll have you take it from here. Oh, if folks want closed captioning, we do have it available through rev.com. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Emily, and I'm happy to be here. My name is Michael Marr, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm really excited today to get to talk to you about socially just assessment. I've been looking into it for a couple of years now, and I'm excited that it's finally taking a hold in higher education. I did want to start out this session with a prompt. Um, easy prompt. What assessment methodologies have you previously used in your positions? And feel free to type it in or come off mute if you like. And Emily, I cannot see that chat box, so
I will yell them out as they come.
you.
We got our first one, so I put the question in the chat also. We have Sky Factor, QWLS.
Okay,
Quality
quality
of
of
work
work
life.
life.
Those like acronyms. Yep, quality of work life survey. Awesome.
I mean, that's okay.
That's it so far. Well, let's wait a couple more
Okay,
minutes. We have surveys, focus groups, program assessments.
there we go. Okay.
I'm gonna be real. Sometimes I get lazy and use Google Forms. I'm working away from it. I am, Michael, I promise.
What?
Yep, program assessments, focus groups. So those are a couple that have come through.
Okay, so great. So we're all kind of familiar with these term assessment and methodologies. Before we get truly going, I just want to reiterate that we all use Zoom. Your chat, your mute, and all those functions are available to you. And this presentation, like our shape, is really rooted in the principles of community. And we would just like to emphasize that, along with acknowledging the land on which the university is built and its belonging to Native Americans. Okay, so session overview. So this is our roadmap for today. I will try not to bore you. If you have questions as we go along, please ask. Comments. If you didn't understand something, please let me know. I'm happy to go back over it. So today we will introduce assessment more broad, in more broader terms. We will take a look at traditional assessment methodologies. Um, we will look at emerging socially just assessment construct and what would a new framework for assessment be. And why is this critical to us in the LSC? Because it impacts our ability to provide inclusive and equitable services and programs to students and the community at large. So traditional assessment constructs. Um, so assessment evolved from the field of research assessment is very performance based, um, kind of gives you the ability to attract, to to monitor progress and document progress. Um, it primarily utilizes quant- quantitative methods early on, so um, numbers and actually objective measures. Um, pa- these paradigms vested the privilege with the investigator. So the investigator knew truth. There was an objective truth. Interpret this paradigm based on the investigator, also constructivists based on their biases and their training. Um, so yeah, and this is a this we can see throughout the 20th century. Individuals socially construct knowledge which is based on interpretation. So um so the author of this study has power to dictate the narrative, and that from research down to assessment. So yeah, highly susceptible to bias. So what is missing? Any thoughts on what might be missing from that? Okay. Um,
Yeah, I'll start us off. I think the stories are missing, right? Like
right.
the you said that initially it had focused on only quantitative data being focused on numbers. And so, numbers, we can make a lot of assumptions on the why about those numbers. And so, and I think that, yeah, so that starts us off.
Right.
Curious if other folks see things missing.
I think the placing of power, right, with the assessor doesn't acknowledge. I'm sorry, words are hard for me today. I think there's an ownership piece, right, around those who are being assessed and the
Mhm.
knowledge that they bring and the stories that they bring. And if traditional assessment, at least in my, like, when I think of assessment, I often think of, all powerful researcher who
Mhm.
determines the methodology, the framework through which everything will be interpreted and understood. And that often doesn't really get
Mhm.
named in ways that most folks will understand, or the impact that that can have on the knowledge being assessed.
Correct. Correct.
Michael, we have
And
something in the chat
oh
also.
yeah.
The experiences behind the numbers or other factors that could influence the rating that might not be accounted for. And there's another comment, there is no C, there's no constant.
Right. Right. Uh, Exactly. Thank you all for your uh participation, and remember when research was evolving in the 20th century, it was also framed in a predominantly white construct. So the question formation, how data was interpreted and analyzed, all was filtered through a construct that was not as diverse as we would like it to be. So it just came out so cultural. Oh, go ahead.
We just have another from the chat. The breadth
Yeah,
of experience, Emily's comment about stories bringing in identity component that can often be missing from quantitative data.
correct. Thank you for that. So culture, profound aspect of the assessment process, not only for the person or thing being assessed, but also for the assessor, because it will dictate um, methodology, methodology, design, questions, data analysis, and interpretation. So, this brings together what another key factor: systems of power and oppression, looking at um, issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, access. So that brings us now, we're taking inquiry that evolved from research down to assessment, taking that inquiry and combining it with equity. And in the middle, it's also just assessment. So that's where I would like to focus the rest of our time together, kind of breaking down what that looks like in practical terms. Before we go forward, are there any questions, comments? Okay. So assessment as social justice. Um, I like to frame it as any assessment that I do has a has a has a layer of social justice. It may not be obvious, but whatever I'm investigating, there's a layer of social justice, of culture embedded in that subject. So, with that framing, we can relook at assessment as more than just transactional, but transformational. Um, we are intentionally shifting how we use assessment, um, and beginning to deconstruct systems of oppression by by exposing um, and I'm sorry, we'll also need to uncover and examine biases in our own assessment procedures, to ensure that they are culturally responsible. Um, and we cannot understand students' experiences without understanding the system of oppression in which students live. And I know this is can be a loaded statement, but that's will is our responsibility as researchers, as assessors, as investigators to really understand the systems that we function in. We can't be blind to oppression in our own system. We have to be willing to confront that.
Hey, Michael,
Okay?
I'm wondering
Yeah.
if you could, like, God, I'm definitely learning and I love examples. I'm wondering if, do you have an example in your past or from what you've seen in assessments of ways that bias has impacted assessment procedures?
Um, well, for me personally, and I'll get more into this, but it's making sure that like demographics are complete and exhaustive and inclusive. It's making sure that pronouns are correct and um situations and stories are practical and not these not a not I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's more practical situations and not hypotheticals, more what is happening for the student. And that's kind of where the investigator needs to be more flexible
Hmm.
to understand there's something deeper that I can get to if I ask the right question. So yeah,
Yeah, thanks, Michael.
does that help? Okay, great. Um, any other questions right now? So socially just assessment construct. So it's really a continuum construct. It's yeah. So the first is kind of a tiered approach. It's a continuum, so it's a gradual build up. And I will walk you through this one by one, so don't get intimidated. Um, so bias-free assessment. We are just looking to review all of our assessment tools and instruments and seek out bias, embedded bias in how we send out these surveys, how we ask the questions, how we get back the results, how we interpret the results. We will really be critical of the whole assessment cycle. When we move towards culturally responsive assessment, we're looking at individual cultures when we're thinking about collecting data. So we're looking at the needs of the Native American culture, where we're looking at how do we gain data, or we're looking at the needs of the African American students and how to reach them where they are. If that's an email or IG post, we need to be willing to reach that population that we seek, and not just expect them to click here in an email. That may not be engaging for some cultures. So next we're moving to socially just assessment, built on critical paradigms considering agency, power, of voice. So here is where we are going to really look at the theories like critical race theory and other critical theories to understand what environmental factors should we be measuring, should we be asking about, so that um so that we can understand that environment, we can understand what is going on college campuses through the perspective of that marginalized population. So the last two deconstructed assessment. So we move from socially just assessment to deconstructed assessment, where we're actually exposing and doing the analysis and interpretation to expose inequities or unjust systems. And then um and then finally assessment for social justice, we're kind of putting it all together to understand the impact of power and oppression on these social structures. Uh, yeah, and in that way, it is hoped that we see social change from the summaries that we are putting out, from the way we engage our community as staff members utilizing this data in our larger groups as we make decisions. So that's a lot, right? That's a big process. Social change isn't easy. Um, nor can we take it all one big bite, right? One bite at a time. So here's where we are as a student center, as a place. Um, yes, the assessment for social justice is, you know, aspirational and we need to be there, but we're just not. And that is something, as a good investigator, you have to know where you're starting. So I I I want us to start from the beginning, going back to the assessments that we utilize regularly and examining the language. What demographics are they asking? What are they not asking and why not? And kind of begin to uncover some of those layers. And I'll have a couple practical examples in the next slide, but I really would love to hear from this group because I'm in this with you as well. These are assessments that we've been doing for a while, and it's hard to break that pattern. But once we get in this mindset, it'll be easier year after year. So, and then to move on to culturally responsive assessment, we have to look at how are we reaching the populations? Are we really getting the populations that we want? And why or why not? So that's kind of where I want to focus the rest of this conversation. Um, and then we will go back to the last three as kind of a more aspirational, directional place to go. Um, yes, Emily.
In the chat, we have a question. Michael, how do you feel about, quote, paying students for their time when we ask them to complete surveys, participate in focus groups as a step toward being mindful of their time? Is that a part of socially just assessment?
I think so. I would be careful about pay. I would rather incentivize. So if we know, you know, food security is an issue, we may incentivize some gift cards. Or if we know, like, we work with the bookstore to get gift certificates for our bigger surveys. Those things that really students can benefit from, um, instead of direct cash payment. But yes, incentives are definitely encouraged.
Well, and I wonder if that changes the dynamic if there are employees, right? Like if they're expected to fill it out as a expectation of their work experience, that
Mhm.
feels definitely in alignment with paying students, but it's paying them as part of their work. What
Yes.
I see the question is, around like students who are not working and what you're talking about, Michael, incentivizing. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
We have another one. Pam, I allow all my employees to participate in surveys on the clock. Focus groups, I have had a couple of employees participate in the past and allowed them to stay on the clock for those times. So yeah, that distinction between like student employees and then student who we want their perspective about how things are going or
Yeah,
thanks, Michael.
and yeah, thank you. And there's a layer too. It's like, okay, do we incentivize the student employee, or is that, is that like overtime? So it gets complex. So I thank you for asking that question, Pam, for making that comment. So we kind of touched on the practical application of these bias-free assessment and culturally responsive assessment, particularly on the cultural responsive assessment. The disaggregation of data is very important. And this is tricky because the populations are a lot of times lower than the um than the sample population, but it's critically important, and also it's also critically important to prevent or protect anon- anonymity of the 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 people in the demographics because of the small numbers. If you're dealing with a smaller cohort, it's going to be tricky. So I just caution you, and please feel free to reach out for me for to me for consultation and feedback. But yes, considering demographics, offering the assessment in multiple languages, access, digital access, ADA compliant, um, things like that. We need to start um, at this place in order to get further down that continuum.
Michael, do you know if ones that are available to us at CSU, like Qualtrics, Ramlink, like are ADA compliant in terms of like available with readers or things like that?
Yes, I believe they all compliant. Last generation, I believe. But yeah.
Great. And I know I just learned the word disaggregation. I'm wondering if you could say what disaggregation of the
Okay.
data is.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Thank you. So, so when the results come in, you don't know what person filled out what. It's just a big data table. So if I'm disaggregating, I will say, okay, race and ethnicity. I want to see how many, people who identified as white, black, Asian, Hispanic. I want to pull out all of those details in the main data set. And then with that, I can cross tab or kind of look at different answers based on that demographic category. So it lets you know, okay, the whole sample thinks that campus is a safe place, but there's a sample of African American students or trans students that don't feel safe. So that will lead me as the investigator to investigate that more, get a update my instrument or develop a new instrument or filter who I sample in the future. Did that help? Okay. Great. Thank you, everybody. Any other questions? Okay. Okay. So, um, so now that we've understand the first two, let's kind of look at these last three as a not aspirational, but as a all in one. If we're doing one, we'll do the other. That's just how it flows. That's that's my belief as an investigator. So how might this look? I have some reflection questions, and we can just spend some time talking about this. Um, how and will the systemic bias and discrimination affect student learning and the student experience? In what ways do you optimize student agency by providing opportunities for students to define their own learning or learning in their own language? And how are you attending to intersectionality, recognizing that multiple identities cannot be fully separated? So these questions, you see how involved that next level is. I would love to start some conversation about these questions, but I also realize how heavy they are. So
I think to kick us off, I'm looking at question 2 and going back to, what Natalie has said and I've said about the ways that stories can fully encompass a student's experience in their own language, and even who is theming that out and what lenses the investigator is using to create in areas or quote translate it to be generalities. It just makes it a necessary conversation to have and complex. Um, it makes me grateful we have someone like you to consult with because it can feel like a lot to take on. At least that's what I'm feeling initially. I wonder what others are thinking.
right. And if I can just on question 2, I believe that highlights the importance of involving the students at the beginning of the assessment. It's like, okay, what do you want to get out of this experience? What are some learning objectives that you have? That way they're creating their own language and we're giving that agency right at the beginning. That's kind of where my mind goes on that one. And I will make these available for the um, notes for after the session. Okay, so a couple more slides and then you are free to go. So, no, assessment is can be boring, but hopefully you're finding this a little bit better than your typical presentation. So inquiry which fosters equity. That's the goal. Socially just assessments. So this is further on the continuum. Um, we will be looking at retention data in addition to campus climate data and disaggregate all of it. To deconstructing assessment, we will look at the impact of microaggressions in the local political climate, which impacts students' well-being. I could go on for days with that, but I won't. Assessment for social justice, as I said, the culmination seeks to remedy inequities uncovered in the data. And assessors must be willing to understand their role in promotion of equity on campus. If you are an assessment, if you have any responsibility for assessment, I would hope that your mindset would be geared toward not only collecting the data for the report, but also promoting equity from that data. Oh, questions. Hey, we did
We
it!
did it. There's one in the chat, Michael.
Yeah,
Is there an accurate an accurate web resource to assist with translating language for surveys? I found a blog that highlighted the kind of top 8, but any specifically that you know of or
I don't.
use?
I don't honestly. There's a division of student affairs website that I use. CSU will try to re-up that website with a lot more resources, but not specifically. I do have textbooks, other textbooks, but
You know,
no,
Michael,
yeah.
it's Pam. I was talking with Nick Epley some time ago because we had an initiative that we wanted to translate many of our HR documents, for instance, and policies into multiple languages.
Mhm.
And he was checking out, I don't know if anyone else on this call is familiar, but the WJC right now on their website has like I don't know if it's a Google translator or exactly what it is, but when you're there, you can select the language that you want the entire website to be translated into. And so Nick was going to check into, okay, how accurate is it? I know there's been some situations where online translators haven't necessarily been accurate. So he was going to check into that for the student center. It would just be really interesting, wouldn't it, if there was something like that
Mhm.
so that we could offer surveys in a way where folks could, like you said, from the beginning,
Mhm.
select the language that they wanted to be able to start the
Mhm.
survey in. So it's something to look out for, and it could be something that, you know, maybe we can have the chance to utilize sooner rather than later. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, man.
We have an addition in the chat. I have tried to use Google for Spanish, and a person who speaks Spanish just laughed. Here's a funny thing about translating through Google, and there's a YouTube.
Yeah.
There's a question from, do you have an example of, do you have examples of a socially just assessment versus a non-just one? Are there ones that are like kind of side to side comparison? I'm thinking of even when we're talking about asking questions and the assumptions or biases that can be present in the questions we ask also?
Mhm. I don't have explicit tools as examples. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. The bias in the question can come out if the question is worded towards, a doctor and they'll specify pronouns, or they're talking about education and specifying racial demographics or things like that that may present bias or may even be a trigger. So it's just, I can point to explicit example, but it's a lot of that language of inclusivity. Is it in there or is it not? But thank you for the question. Okay. So thank you all for paying attention. I know assessment isn't the most engaging topic, but I did want to introduce it to you. I am more than willing to come to your department's meetings and talk about what this specifically would look like in your context. My email is right there. I would be happy in person or virtual, whatever will work for your team. And thank you.
Michael, thanks so much. We appreciate everyone who was able to be here to have this conversation and learn a little bit about more how we can work towards socially just assessment by being bias-free and culturally responsive to start. Thank you so much. If you want to come off mute and say bye, it's always nice to hear you. But thanks so much.
I am. Enjoy lunch.
Thanks. Ditto.
Bye.